The ice had melted. She stood, mid-sentence through the man's endless talking, and a hand cold as snow pressed against the small of her back, stopping her. "Don't," a voice whispered, close to her ear. "He's watching you." She didn't remember seeing this man approach. A second ago, he'd been sitting motionless at the end of the bar. No phone, not a single breath. Now he was here, carrying the scent of cold stone and ancient churches. The candle on the table went out. At the door, a figure in a 19th century waistcoat was moving inside, eyes sweeping the room. "Searching, we have to go now," the hand tightened. "And whatever happens, don't look at his face." She turned her head. The glass slipped from her fingers. But it didn't shatter. It stopped, suspended half an inch above the floor, while the entire room around her went still, everyone. Except three of them. The ice had melted. Iris noticed this, the way she noticed everything she wasn't supposed to be thinking about. The slow collapse of the cubes. The way the gin had gone watery and warm. The way Greg was still talking. He hadn't stopped talking. Not once. Not for 43 minutes. She knew it was 43 minutes because she had been counting. Because counting was something to do. Because if she stopped counting, she would have to actually listen to what Greg was saying about distributed ledger technology and the paradigm shift and the token that was going to revolutionize the art market, and she took a sip of her water gin. It was awful. The bar was called Nocturne, which should have been a warning. It was the kind of place that thought low lighting and overpriced cocktails were a substitute for having a personality. Dark wood, leather stools, candles that cost more than her electric bill. The whole room designed to make people feel like something was happening when nothing was. Greg had chosen it. Of course he had. Greg was the kind of man who confused vocabulary with conversation. Who said paradigm shift when he meant change. Who said architecting solutions when he meant working. Who had not, in 43 minutes, asked Iris a single question about herself. Not her name. He'd already forgotten it. She was fairly certain. Not what she did. Not what she thought. Not whether she had opinions about the fundamental restructuring of global finance. He had simply started talking the moment she sat down. Like someone had pressed play on a keynote presentation. Like she was the audience, and the presentation had no intermission and no Q&A and no scheduled end. "NFTs are just the beginning," Greg said. Iris looked at her watch. She looked at the door. She considered the window, assessed the drop. Decided the heel on her left shoe probably wouldn't survive it. She needed a plan. She needed an exit that didn't involve property damage or a conversation where she had to explain why she was leaving. Because explaining would require Greg to pause, and Greg had demonstrated a remarkable commitment to not pausing, and she wasn't sure he was physically capable of. She looked up and stopped. There was a man sitting at the bar, alone. No phone. No drink he was working on. No eyes moving around the room the way everyone's eyes move in bars. Looking for something better, something more, something that isn't this. He was just sitting there, holding a glass of something dark. Watching the room, still, not relaxed still. Not bored still. Still the way a painting is still. The way something is still when it has been still for a very long time, and has stopped noticing that it is. He was wearing a dark suit that fit like it had been made for him, which it probably had. Dark hair, neat in a way that didn't require effort, because it had apparently never been anything else. He looked like someone had taken a figure from a portrait. 1810, maybe 1820, the kind that hangs in a room no one enters anymore, and placed him on a bar stool to see if anyone would notice. Iris noticed. Greg was explaining smart contracts. The man at the bar turned his head, not because someone called his name, not because something moved. He turned as though he had felt something, a shift in the room's attention, a change in the specific texture of the air. His eyes found hers dark, steady, the color of good wood in bad light. And for one strange, unnerving second, Iris had the sensation of being read. Not looked at, not assessed, read. The way you read a document you've been studying for a long time, the way you look at something you already know. It lasted 3 seconds. Greg said something about blockchain. Iris held the man's gaze, and mouthed 2 words as clearly as she could. "Help me." She expected confusion. She expected the polite half-smile of a stranger who didn't understand. She expected him to look away. Instead, a flicker. Something crossed his face, a thread of something between amusement and recognition, gone almost before it arrived, and he gave a single nod. Small, deliberate, the kind of nod that means I understand completely and I will handle this. He set down his glass, he stood, he walked toward them. He moved through the crowded bar without hurrying. Without touching anyone. without weaving or angling or doing any of the things people do in crowded rooms. People simply shifted, moved, stepped aside without looking up, without knowing why, the way water moves around something that has always been there. The noise in the room seemed to thin around him. Greg was mid-sentence. And the beauty of it is the volatility, if you know how to ride the wave. The man arrived. He didn't look at Greg. He looked at Iris, darling. His voice was low and unhurried. It carried the way a cello carries in a quiet room. Not loud, just present. I'm so sorry I'm late. The traffic was unconscionable, and then he leaned down and pressed his lips to her cheek. The cold was a shock. Not a bad shock. A startling one. Like pressing your fist against a window in January. Like picking up something from a refrigerator shelf that turns out to be colder than expected. She felt it in her teeth. The hairs on her arms stood up. He smelled of something clean and very old. Stone churches, winter air, the inside of a library in a city that doesn't exist anymore. It's fine, she managed. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. He straightened, turned to Greg. The look he gave Greg was not threatening, not aggressive. Nothing so dramatic as that. It was something quieter and more devastating. The look of someone cataloging an insect and deciding it wasn't interesting enough to kill. Greg's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again, do I? Know you? No, the man said one word. Complete. No elaboration. No apology for the lack of one. The silence that followed was the kind that has its own weather. Greg compressed. His shoulders curved inward. His jaw softened. His very expensive watch suddenly looked like a prop on his wrist. Too large, too shiny. A costume piece from a show no one was watching. The man turned back to Iris. His expression shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. Like a room where someone opened a window. Are you ready to go? Yes, she grabbed her purse. Stood. Yes, absolutely. Yes, she didn't look at Greg's face on the way out. She could feel it anyway. The bewilderment. The deflation. Good. The man placed a hand on the small of her back as they walked. The chill of his fingers came through her dress like a current. Not unpleasant. Steady, like something she was already adjusting to before she'd decided to. He guided her through the bar and out into the September night. On the sidewalk, under a street lamp, he dropped his hand. The warmth came rushing back to her spine. She turned to face him. Thank you. She meant it completely. You just saved my life. He was explaining a paradigm shift, the man said. There was something dry in his voice. Not quite humor, the shape of it. In my experience, those are best survived from a distance. She laughed. A real one. Surprised out of her. You heard that from across the room? I hear a great many things. A pause. Most of them are considerably less tedious than distributed ledger technology. Was he really that loud? He was that earnest. Which is worse. She looked at him. He was looking at her with that same steady quality. Like he was still reading, like she was still interesting. My name is Callum, he said. Iris. She offered her hand. He took it. His grip was firm. His skin cool and dry. Not ice cold, not unpleasant, but distinctly, unmistakably cooler than any hand she'd shaken in September. Like he'd been standing outside for an hour, except it was 62 degrees and warm. He held her hand a beat longer than necessary. Then released it. Can I buy you a drink? She asked. As a thank you, something moved in his expression. A flicker of surprise. Quickly replaced by something more careful. I'd prefer, if you'd allow it, to see you properly. Not as a rescue. He met her eyes. Coffee. Tomorrow morning. I'll leave word for you at the library. She stared at him. How did you know I work at a library? He glanced at her wrist, the faint blue smudge there, the date stamp from the Astor Place branch. Visible if you knew what you were looking at. Readable if you were looking from across a crowded bar in low light. She hadn't noticed it herself until this moment. 10 o'clock, if that suits you, he said. I'll leave a message. He turned and walked away before she could ask how he'd read the stamp from that distance. Before she could ask any of the questions forming at the back of her mind. He moved into the foot traffic of the street and disappeared. Not around a corner, not into a doorway. He was there, and then he wasn't. Without any clear moment of departure, like smoke. Like something that had never quite fully arrived, Iris stood on the sidewalk for a long time. Her cheek was still cold where he'd kissed it. She told herself, walking home, that she wasn't going to think about it. She thought about it for 6 hours. The way he'd stood up without hesitating. The way people had moved out of his path without being asked. The way his voice had dropped when he said darling and somehow made it sound not ridiculous. The cold, the smell. The way he'd looked at her like she was something he recognized. She didn't sleep well. She told herself that was because of the bad gin. She didn't believe herself. In the morning, she went to work. There was a note at the front desk, heavy cream paper. Not the kind from a stationery store. The kind from somewhere older. The handwriting precise and slightly old-fashioned, the letters formed with the deliberation of someone who had learned to write in a century that took penmanship seriously. The cafe on 7th. C. Margaret, the head librarian, watched her read it with undisguised interest. A gentleman left that at opening, Margaret said. Tall, dark suit. Very. She searched for the word, composed. He didn't blink the entire time he was at the desk. Thank you, Margaret. That's a detail I thought you should have. The cafe was small and quiet. It smelled like espresso and old wood and the specific patience of a building that had survived several decades of New York winters. Iris arrived 5 minutes early. Callum arrived at exactly 10 o'clock. Not a minute before. Not a second after dark trousers. A black sweater that absorbed the morning light rather than reflecting it. He moved through the doorway and to her table with the same unhurried quality she'd noticed the night before. Tables didn't obstruct him. Chairs didn't catch his knees. He arrived at her table without seeming to have traveled to get there. He sat. A waitress materialized. He ordered a black coffee without looking at the menu. Without looking at the waitress. Without looking at anything except Iris. Iris ordered a latte. How did you know which library? She said. You were carrying a first edition of Bulgakov, he said. In your bag. The Astor Place branch has one of the few copies in public circulation. My bag was zipped. Not entirely. She stared at him. He held her stare with complete calm, like being stared at was something he'd had considerable time to get comfortable with. You're very observant, she said. I've had a great deal of practice, the waitress returned. Set a small card on the table. A QR code printed in the center, bright and cheerful and modern. For the menu, the waitress said, Just scan with your phone? Callum looked at the card, picked it up, turned it over, then over again, held it at arm's length, brought it close. Examined the arrangement of black and white pixels with the focused attention of a man who has been handed something he does not understand and is not going to pretend otherwise. What is this? He said. Not a question. A statement of genuine inquiry directed at the universe. It's a QR code, Iris said. You scan it with your phone camera and it opens the menu. He looked at her, then at the code, then at her again. You're telling me, he said slowly, that this pattern, this arrangement of squares, contains information readable by a device. Yes, and you're comfortable with that. She bit the inside of her cheek. Hard. It's very common. Every restaurant has them now. Every restaurant has elected to encode their offerings in a format that requires a surveillance device to decipher. He set the card down with careful precision. The exact precision of a man placing something down that he doesn't want to touch again. It's not a surveillance device. It's a phone. Those are the same thing. He looked at the waitress, who had been hovering, who was now somewhere between confused and fascinated. I'll have the coffee. Black. If you could tell me what pastries are available, verbally, in the traditional fashion, I would be grateful. The waitress blinked. We have croissants, muffins, and the croissant. Thank you. He placed the QR card face down on the table, where it stayed. For the rest of the morning, he did not eat the croissant. It sat on its small plate for the next 2 hours, untouched, perfectly intact. Elegant in its complete abandonment. Like a prop someone had placed there to make the scene look more normal than it was, Iris noticed. She filed it away, added it to the growing stack. He asked her what the oldest thing she'd ever held was. She told him about the cuneiform tablet, 4,000 years old, of receipt for livestock, clay incised, fired, boring and perfect and irreplaceable. History is mostly receipts, he said, and something in the way he said it, mostly receipts, didn't sound like something he'd read. It sounded like something he knew from having been there. Debts and transactions. The grand narrative is something we impose afterward. And love letters, she said. And diaries no one was meant to read. They're the only parts worth preserving. He was watching her with a focus that had physical weight. Like she was the only light source in the room, and everything else was just context. What do you love about it? The archive work, nobody had ever asked her that, not like that. Not with the expectation that her answer mattered. She told him about the silence of the stacks. The weight of a document that someone else held 300 years ago. The way you can reconstruct an entire life from a handful of letters. The handwriting that changes after a loss. The ink that goes heavier in grief. The things people don't say, because they assume whoever reads it will understand. She talked for 20 minutes. He didn't interrupt once. His coffee sat untouched in front of him. steaming, then cooling, then cold. He never reached for it. "You haven't touched your coffee," she said finally. He looked down at it. "The way you look at something you've forgotten you were supposed to pretend to want. I'm not much of a coffee drinker." "I enjoy the smell, then why did you order it?" A pause. The briefest recalibration. It seemed like the appropriate thing to do. They left the cafe in bright early afternoon. Callum stepped through the door and the September sun hit him and, for just a second, he flinched. A tightening around his eyes, a slight turn of his head, like the light had weight, like it was something to be managed rather than simply experienced. He moved toward the shade of the awning without seeming to decide to. Stood there. Looked at her from the shadow. "I'd like to see you again, Iris. I'd like that too. Friday. Dinner. I'll come to you at 8. He gave her a small nod. Old-fashioned. The kind that belongs to a century that used nods the way people now use everything else. Then he walked away, staying close to the buildings, moving through patches of shade with a precision that might have been habit or might have been something else entirely. Iris watched him go, then looked back at the table they'd left, the croissant. Still there, untouched. The coffee, stone cold. The QR code card, face down. She thought, something is very wrong with that man. Then she thought, I'm having dinner with him on Friday, and I am not changing my mind about this. The restaurant was Italian. Expensive. Lit entirely by candles, which Iris was beginning to think was not an aesthetic choice. Callum studied the menu with the concentration of a man reading a treaty in a language he mostly but not entirely speaks. He ordered the burrata, the risotto, red wine. He did not eat the burrata. He did not eat the risotto. He moved food around his per plate with architectural precision, rearranging, composing. The finished result looked like something a food stylist would have charged $600 for. Beautiful. Undisturbed. Completely untouched, the waiter cleared both plates without comment, which told Iris something about the kind of restaurant this was and the kind of clientele it served. You didn't eat, she said. I had a late lunch. You said that last time. I have late lunches frequently. Callum. She kept her voice even. You ordered burrata and built a sculpture out of it. The muscle at his jaw tightened, once. Then went still. Not the way a person's jaw tightens. The way stone settles after a shift. The presentation was exceptional. I felt it deserved visual appreciation. She let it go. The pile of things she was letting go was getting architectural. Callum reached into his jacket for the leather billfold. She caught a glimpse of what was inside. Not credit cards. Folded notes of some kind, heavy paper, engraved. The kind of currency that hadn't been in circulation for a long time. Before he could extract one, I wouldn't, sir, a voice. Behind them, Iris turned. A man stood at the edge of their table. Tall, thin, dressed in a waistcoat and tie that managed to look both contemporary and definitively from 1890. His face was angular and composed. His expression was that of someone who has been patient for a very long time and is now being patient with deliberate intentions. Phineas, Callum said. And something in his voice was new. The faintest edge of resignation. The tone of a man whose solitude has been interrupted by someone who has a key to every lock, sir. Phineas. Dopp produced a slim black credit card and placed it in the waiter's hand in a single smooth motion. Then he looked at Iris. His expression didn't change. But something behind his eyes, something carefully held, flickered. Like a candle in a closed room, responding to a change in air pressure. It looked, improbably, like delight. You must be the reason, he said. Phineas, Callum said. A warning. Merely observing, sir. He turned to Iris and inclined his head with complete formality. A pleasure. I am Phineas. I manage Callum's, he paused. A precise, deliberate pause. Affairs. You started to say something else, Iris said. Phineas looked at Callum. Callum looked at the table. The candle between them guttered. His calendar, Phineas said smoothly. Which is, at present, alarmingly empty. 3 consecutive evenings, sir. Lord Vane has inquired twice. The delegation from the Northern Court sent a formal notice, and the matter we discussed 6 weeks ago remains entirely unresolved. It can wait. It has been waiting for 80 years. Then another evening won't matter. Phineas's mouth moved, the smallest possible movement. He was trying not to smile. Iris could see the effort. She could also see that he was losing. Of course, sir. I'll inform the council you are indisposed. He turned to Iris again. A genuine pleasure, Miss Voss. And then he was gone. Moving through the restaurant with the same frictionless precision as Callum, as though the room had been expecting both of them and had arranged itself accordingly. Who was that? Iris asked. My assistant. Your assistant who manages your calendar and almost called you something that starts with his. Callum picked up his wineglass, which she had noticed, over 3 hours, he had held continuously and never once drunk from. Phineas has been with me for a long time. He occasionally forgets which century we're in. How long is a long time? Sometime, she let that go too. On the 3rd evening, she brought him to her apartment. She'd been nervous about it in a way she couldn't entirely account for. The place was small, books on every surface. The kitchen smelled permanently of coffee. The window faced a fire escape and a view of another building's brick wall. Not exactly the kind of space you bring a man who moves like a figure from an oil painting. Callum stood in the doorway and waited. Not because she hadn't opened it for him. She had. He stood outside the threshold and waited, and there was something in the waiting that felt deliberate. Like the threshold itself meant something. You can come in, she said. Thank you, he said, and he stepped inside. And the way he said it, thank you, had a weight that went beyond politeness. Like the invitation had mattered in a way she didn't entirely understand yet, he went to the bookshelf immediately. Stood before it with the absorbed attention of a man in a museum, standing before something that matters. Good evening, said a voice from the kitchen counter. I noticed your front door opened. Would you like me to turn on the lights? Callum went absolutely still, not startled still. The other kind, the kind that comes before a decision, the kind that assesses first and reacts second and has learned never to confuse the two. His head turned, slowly. Toward the voice, on the counter, beside the coffee maker, sat a small black cylinder with a glowing blue ring. Who is that? He said. His voice had dropped, half an octave. Maybe more, that's Alexa, Iris said. There is a woman in your kitchen. She's not a woman. She's a voice assistant. She knows when your door opens. He was looking at the device with the focused concern of someone identifying a structural problem in a load-bearing wall. She controls your lights. She's a speaker. She plays music and sets timers, and is she imprisoned? Iris stopped. She's a piece of technology, Callum. She has a name. She responds to her name. She is aware of activity in her environment. He took one step toward the counter, then stopped himself. By any reasonable standard of Alexa, Iris said firmly, play jazz. Coltrane filled the apartment, clean and golden and warm. Callum regarded the speaker with the expression of a man whose concerns have not been addressed but who recognizes the situation has moved in a direction he cannot fully control. I find this troubling, he said. Noted. She handed him a glass of water. He took it, held it the way he held everything, like a source of warmth, not hydration. Do you have technology? At home? We have electricity, running water, central heating, which was added in 1923 and remains a point of ongoing debate. He paused. Phineas manages a telephone. He finds it philosophically objectionable. You don't have one? I find it difficult to see the merit in a device that allows anyone to reach you at any moment for any reason. That's the whole point of it. Yes, he said. That's precisely the problem. She unplugged Alexa. He visibly settled. Something in his shoulders. Something in the quality of his stillness. It moved from wary to quiet. Like a room after a window is closed against the wind, they sat on the couch. Her at one end, him at the other, 6 inches between them. Coltrane played from her phone. Callum sat without moving, without shifting, without the small unconscious adjustments people make constantly, the weight redistribution, the leg crossing, the restless hands reaching for nothing. Just still. Still in a way that had started, somewhere in the last few weeks, to feel less strange and more like weather. Something you adjusted to without deciding to. You're looking at my hands, he said. They don't move. They don't need to. People fidget constantly. You just don't. I've had 7 centuries to stop. A pause. It took approximately 3. She reached out and touched his hand where it rested on his knee. His fingers were cool. Still, he didn't pull away. But she felt the effort in his stillness, the deliberate quality of it. Something very old choosing to hold its ground. Your pulse just increased, he said quietly. Don't tell me about my pulse, I won't. If you'd prefer, I would prefer. And also, she stopped, also? I don't want you to stop noticing, he looked at her, and something in his expression came undone. Not dramatically. The way ice comes undone in spring, not breaking but releasing, slowly. Without announcement, you are a very confusing person, he said. Good, you've had 7 centuries of not being confused. It's my turn. The following Tuesday she was 3 blocks from home. Groceries, 3 bags, too heavy, the handles cutting into her fingers. She had done this to herself. The potatoes were excessive, and she had known that when she put them in the basket and had done it anyway, she heard footsteps beside her. You need help, she looked up. Callum, standing there as though he had materialized out of the October air, which, she was beginning to understand, was essentially what he did. It was barely dusk. The sky had just turned. Earlier than she'd ever seen him out. I'm fine. You're listing to the left. The bag with the potatoes is unbalanced. He took all 3 bags from her in one hand, 50 pounds of groceries. He held them with the effort of picking up a newspaper. His arm wasn't tense. His posture didn't change. His weight didn't shift so much as a single degree. He turned and started walking toward her building. Like this was completely unremarkable. She followed. Staring at the back of his arm, he felt her staring. Of course he did. He turned his head slightly, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked genuinely caught. Something raw and unguarded crossed his face before the composure assembled itself back into position. I work out, he said. Callum, quite seriously. There is a gymnasium at the... You picked up 50 pounds of groceries in one hand and didn't shift your weight. Silence. Long enough that a normal person would have filled it with something. Anything. He didn't. I work out extensively, he said. She laughed. She couldn't help it. The lie was so transparently inadequate to the situation, so earnest, so completely, hopelessly wrong for the moment it was attempting to address. He looked at her with the expression she'd been cataloging. The one that meant he had said something, and she was laughing, and he genuinely could not identify what was funny. And the fact that he couldn't was, somehow, precisely the reason it was. He carried the bags up 3 flights of stairs, without breathing, not without breathing hard, without breathing at all. She watched the back of his neck the entire way up. It never moved, not a single breath, not even the suggestion of one. In the kitchen, he set the bags down with careful precision. She stood close. The kitchen was small. He was very present. The air between them had the specific weight of something that was moving toward something else, whether they decided to help it or not. You're not going to tell me, she said. I'd prefer to explain when the time is right. When is that? He looked at her. His eyes were dark and full of something she'd been trying to name for 3 weeks. Something old, something that had been waiting a long time to be looked at directly. When you've decided whether you want to keep seeing me, I've already decided. You've decided with incomplete information, Callum. She took a step toward him. He went very still. I'm an archivist, she said. I work with incomplete information every day. I know what it looks like. And I know what evidence looks like. She kept her eyes on his. You don't eat. You don't drink anything. You don't breathe unless you're about to speak. Your skin is cold. You flinch in sunlight. You can hear conversations across crowded rooms. You just carried my groceries like they were made of paper. She paused. I have a theory. The stillness that came over him was absolute. Not human still, something older. Something that had learned to be still before humanity had a word for it. What is your theory? He said. Very quiet. I think you should tell me the truth, and then we'll see if I'm right. He looked at her for a long time, then he told her, not all of it, not yet. But enough, he was, yes, what she had concluded. Born in 1319, in what was now the English Midlands, he was, by her calculation, 707 years old. He had not, in all of that time, met someone who responded to the truth the way Iris responded. Which was to say, without screaming, without fleeing, and with an immediate follow-up question about logistics. Do you have a reflection? She asked. No, is that why you never check your hair? My hair hasn't changed in 700 years. Checking it seems redundant. How does the feeding work? The actual, not the way you're imagining. You don't know what I'm imagining. You're imagining something from a film. Something violent. He looked at his hands, the single old ring on his left hand. Dark metal. No stone. It's intimate. More intimate than is appropriate to describe in detail at your kitchen table at this particular juncture. Fair enough, he told her about the court. Carefully, in measured pieces. A political structure, a community, laws and governance, and a position that had come with lineage and had required, at various points in 7 centuries, considerably more management than he had anticipated when he first understood what it meant, and a title. He said it like a man walking across ice he hasn't tested yet, testing each syllable before committing weight to it. Among my kind, he said, the title is king. She looked at him across her kitchen table. With the stacked mail and the coffee maker and the window facing the fire escape, you're a vampire king. I would prefer if you didn't say it with that particular inflection. What inflection? The one that makes it sound like a novelty item. She pressed her lips together. So you have, what? Subjects? A throne? I have responsibilities. A residence. and an extremely persistent assistant who has been calling me every 20 minutes since he left the restaurant, as if on cue, a faint buzz from his jacket pocket, which he ignored. The title is largely administrative. You're a vampire mayor. I am not. He stopped, reconsidered with visible effort. The analogy is imprecise. You have councils. You have meetings. You have a scheduling crisis. They are not. He stopped again. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. Not the composed register she'd catalogued over 3 weeks. Something underneath all of that. Undone, bewildered. The face of a man who had prepared for every possible response and had received none of them. You are taking this remarkably well, he said. I told you. I'm practical. You just learned that the man you've been having coffee with is a 700-year-old predator who drinks blood and governs a court of vampires. And you're making administrative analogies. I have conditions, she said. He went still. A different kind of still. Not the predator stillness. The stillness of someone who has been offered something they were afraid to want. Conditions, he repeated. If we're doing this, whatever this is, I need the truth. All of it. No more I had a late lunch. No more I work out extensively. If I ask a question, you answer it. If there's something I need to know, you tell me before I have to figure it out myself. Those are reasonable. They're non-negotiable. He looked at her for a long time. The city moved through the window. His phone buzzed again. Phineas, undoubtedly, experiencing another fresh crisis of scheduling. Agreed, he said. Then, very quietly, I had expected this conversation to go differently. You expected me to ask you to leave. Yes, I considered it for about 3 seconds. Then I decided I wanted answers more than I wanted you gone. She stepped forward. He didn't step back. But she felt the effort in his stillness. 7 centuries of something very controlled choosing not to move. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers with a pressure that was precise. Calibrated. Careful not to be too much and understanding exactly what too much meant. Your hand is cold, she said. It's always cold. My temperature is approximately 15 degrees Celsius. It doesn't change, 15 degrees. That's a wine cellar. I've been compared to worse. She didn't let go. Come to dinner Saturday, she said. I'll cook. You don't have to eat. You can build a sculpture out of whatever I make. Phineas can come if he promises not to almost call you something in front of my neighbors. Something happened to his face, not a crack, a dissolution. The whole careful architecture of 7 centuries coming apart at once, and what was underneath, raw, startled, unprepared, looked like hope. The specific kind that hurts to look at because you can see exactly how long it's been since someone last felt it. Saturday, he said. Yes, I would. She held his hand. He was cold, she was warm. The contrast was visible where their fingers laced together. She didn't let go, and neither did he. There is something about a man who has lived 7 centuries. He has learned to want nothing. Because wanting things makes you vulnerable. Because wanting things means eventually losing them. Because eventually, everyone he has ever known has been someone he eventually lost. So he stopped wanting. He became very good at it. He could go decades. He could go a century. He could sit in a room full of people living their short, bright lives and feel nothing except the weight of something very old, watching something very temporary. He had learned to be fine with that. And then a woman in a bar had mouthed "help me" at him across a crowded room, and he had stood up, not because she looked like Margot. Not entirely, not even mostly by now. He told himself this on Saturday morning, while Phineas laid out his jacket and mentioned the unanswered inquiries from Lord Aldrich Vane and the council session that had been postponed twice and was becoming impossible to postpone again. He told himself, she is not Margot, it was true. He knew it by the 2nd week, when she had talked about the cuneiform tablet and called history boring and ordinary, like it was the highest compliment she could imagine. Margot would never have said that. Margot would have said something about beauty, about fate, about the hand of God in the arrangement of things. Iris said boring and ordinary and meant it as praise. And something in him, something that had not moved in a very long time, moved. He should have told her about why he'd been in the bar. About the evening 3 weeks before on Bleecker Street, when she had walked past and he had been unable to breathe for 4 full seconds. About the specific terror of seeing a face you had grieved for nearly 400 years walking toward you in September sunlight. He should have told her. He told himself he would. At the right moment. When there was enough foundation. When there was enough trust that the truth wouldn't collapse everything. He did not tell himself that this was an excuse. He was very good at not knowing certain things about himself. 7 centuries had made him excellent at that, too. Saturday arrived the way good things arrive when you're trying not to want them too much, quietly, without announcement. With the weight of something anticipated too long, Iris cooked pasta. Aglio e olio. Simple. The kind of thing you make when you want to have a real conversation without the cooking getting in the way. Garlic in good oil. Salt, a handful of parsley. The apartment smelled like something a person actually lived in. Callum arrived at 8 o'clock exactly. He stood in the doorway with that quality of his. The waiting, the stillness, the sense of a man who understood that thresholds are not to be crossed lightly. She said, "Come in." He came in. He said, "Thank you," with a weight she'd come to recognize as something more than politeness. Like the invitation itself had a meaning she still didn't fully understand. Phineas arrived 4 minutes later. He brought wine. The bottle was old enough that Iris's archivist instincts fired immediately. She looked at the label, looked again, did the math. "This is from 1947, she said. "A reasonable vintage," Phineas said. He sat very upright in her small kitchen chair and accepted a plate of pasta with the precise appreciative delicacy of someone who had learned to eat human food as a social skill and had perfected it over 4 centuries of diplomatic necessity. He ate with genuine pleasure, which Iris appreciated, which made the contrast with Callum, who sat with his plate untouched, not even performing the architectural rearrangement anymore, just sitting honestly with the food in front of him. Easier to look at. "The king does not eat," Phineas said. He took another forkful. "As you've observed, I maintain the skill for diplomatic occasions." A pause. "And because I enjoy it." "Don't tell the court, Phineas," Callum said. Phineas ignored him with the ease of a man who had been ignoring him since before America was a country. "He hasn't eaten in public in approximately 90 years, Phineas continued. The last occasion was a state dinner in Vienna, 1934. He was required to consume an entire sachertorte. It was an abomination, Callum said. Darkly, it was chocolate cake. It was a violation, Iris laughed, the real kind. The kind that surprises you. Callum looked at her with the expression she'd catalogued. The one that meant he had said something, and she was laughing, and he genuinely could not identify what was funny. And the fact that he couldn't was exactly the reason it was. "You find this amusing," he said. "I find you amusing. I was making a factual statement about Viennese pastry, I know." "That's why it's funny," he looked at her. Something moved in his eyes. Not quite a smile. The shadow of where a smile would be if he let it through. After dinner, Phineas wrapped 2 plates of pasta in foil, carefully, with the attention of a man who has learned that small dignities matter more than people realize. "For diplomatic purposes," he said. "Who are you feeding?" Iris asked. "No one specific." He inclined his head. "But one never knows when pasta will be politically useful," and then he was gone. The apartment was quieter without him, which was strange, because he hadn't taken up that much space. They sat in her living room after Callum stood at the window instead of the couch, looking out at the street. The October lights caught the planes of his face, all angles, all shadow. His stillness against the moving city outside made him look like something fixed in a turning world. A reference point. The thing that doesn't move while everything else does. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You have never not asked me something." The feeding, she kept her voice level. "How does it actually work? Not the logistics. What does it feel like?" For you, he didn't turn from the window. "When you feed from someone," he said, "you feel them, not their thoughts, their state, their emotional reality for a moment, their grief or their contentment or their..." He stopped. "It's more intimate than most people understand from the outside, and feeding from someone you care about?" Now he turned. His expression was careful. The specific honesty of a man who has learned not to volunteer things but will not lie when asked directly. "It becomes something closer to knowing," he said. "You feel the exact weight of what someone is carrying, and they feel something. From you. A kind of recognition, have you ever?" She stopped, started again. "Never mind, fed from someone I loved, not a question." He already knew, once he said. A long time ago, she didn't ask who. She already had a feeling. "Will you ever need to? With me?" "No, immediate, absolute. Never without your choice, not unless you ask for it. There is no expectation. There will never be one. I'm not afraid of it," he looked at her. "You should be." "A little. I'm not afraid of you." Callum, the muscle at his jaw tightened. Once. The ghost reflex. The body remembering what it means to feel something deeply when you no longer have a heartbeat to prove you feel it. "That," he said quietly, "is the most terrifying thing anyone has said to me in 700 years. The townhouse was in the West Village. Not a castle. Not a penthouse with Gothic ambitions. A narrow brownstone on a street that smelled like old money and wet leaves. The kind of building that had been there long enough to stop trying to impress anyone. He brought her on a Thursday evening in late October. She stood in the entrance hall and tried not to look like what she was. An archivist who had just walked into a room that contained more history per square foot than most institutions she'd worked in professionally. First editions in glass cases. A Turkish rug that belonged in a museum and probably had at some point. 3 paintings she recognized from art history coursework that she had assumed were in institutional collections. A clock on the mantelpiece. Dark wood. Stopped. The pendulum frozen at a position it had held for a very long time. "This is your house," she said. "One of them." "How many?" "Several. That's not a number." It's a deliberately vague answer designed to avoid a conversation about real estate. She was already looking at the books. Her hands were behind her back because she didn't trust them. There was a first folio in a case on the far wall. She could see it from where she was standing. "Is that a first folio?" she said. "A gift from a playwright I knew slightly." She turned. Slowly. "You knew Shakespeare. He was difficult at parties." Was he actually difficult, or is that? He was self-aggrandizing, he repeated himself. He had an unfortunate habit of turning every conversation into material. A pause. "So yes. Difficult at parties." Phineas appeared from a side room with a tray. A teacup. A small plate of biscuits. He set it near Iris with the smoothness of centuries of practice. Miss Voss, he was not pretending to be neutral. His composure was a membrane stretched over what could only be described as profound and sustained enjoyment. "The king has been in an excellent temper these past weeks." "The court has noticed, Phineas," Callum said. "Lord Vane believes he's taken up a hobby." His eyes were bright. "The northern delegation thinks he's planning something politically significant." "I have said nothing." A pause. "But I have found the speculation enormously entertaining." "You may arrange to leave the room," Callum said. Phineas inclined his head with the expression of a man who has made his point and is satisfied. He withdrew. Callum told her about the clock. He said it quietly, the way people say things that still have weight after a long time. The clockmaker had been a friend, not a court acquaintance. A friend, the specific kind you have when you're not trying to make one. He had died in 1782. Callum had kept the clock stopped because restarting it had felt, for reasons he couldn't entirely articulate, like a kind of erasure. Like admitting the man was gone in a way that continuing to grieve didn't require. "You could restart it now." Iris said, "I could, but you won't." Not yet, she understood that. The way some griefs get preserved in amber, not because you want to keep hurting, but because the thing inside is the last proof that something happened. That someone existed. That you were there when they did. She drifted through the rooms with her tea. Callum talked. She listened. She touched nothing she wasn't certain about, which was an archivist reflex so ingrained it had become instinct. She turned a corner. A small alcove. Dark. The kind of space in old houses that isn't quite a room and isn't quite a hallway, and doesn't seem to have a purpose beyond existing. There was a painting on the wall, not large, 2 feet by 3. A gilt frame darkened with age to the color of old honey. The surface cracked in the specific pattern that comes from 3 centuries of temperature change. A woman, seated. Early 17th century. She placed it immediately, the structured bodice, the wide lace collar, the quality of the silk. Dutch technique, the fine, intimate detail. The attention of a painter who had been commissioned by someone who loved the subject. Iris looked at the woman's face. And the thought she had managed to complete was, "The technique is excellent, very fine. The modeling of the shadows is particularly..." And then her brain stopped. And then it started again with a completely different message. The woman's face was her face, not similar. Not there's a resemblance if you look a certain way. Her face, her exact face. The same strong brow, the same wide-set dark eyes, the same mouth, the slight asymmetry of the upper lip, the specific fullness of the lower one. The same jaw, the same angle of it, the same way dark hair fell forward and framed everything. Her hands, they were her hands, the teacup tilted in her grip. She didn't notice Callum. Behind her, he was still talking. Something about the clockmaker. She heard his voice trail off. She heard the silence that followed. The silence of a man who has realized something has gone very wrong. Not surprised silence, dread silence. The silence of something a person has been successfully avoiding coming, finally, to the place where it was always going to arrive. Callum, steadier this time. "Who is this?" He appeared in the alcove. She watched his face. She watched it happen. The composure, The 7th century composure, the thing she had thought was just his personality and had come to understand and was something more like structural architecture. She watched it fracture. Not all at once, the way a window cracks in cold. From the center outward, small, spreading iris. Who is she? A breath, deliberate. Chosen, her name was Margot, he said, when 1631, and she, yes, one syllable, an admission that contained everything. Iris set the teacup down on the small side table, carefully, with both hands. Because her hands were shaking and she needed them not to be. She was an archivist. She had held documents that crumbled when touched. She knew how to stay steady when things were fragile. How long, she said. Her voice was even. She was proud of how even it was. Iris, please let me. How long have you known that I look like her? Silence. Before the bar, he said. The words landed somewhere in her chest. Before the bar, before the rescue, she said. Before the note at the library, before the coffee you didn't drink, before the croissant you didn't eat, before the groceries, before the truth, before all of it, she kept her voice level. Because the only alternative was something she was not going to do in this room in front of this painting. Before all of it, I saw you 3 weeks before that night, he said. His voice was stripped. No court register. No management. Just words coming out because they had to. On Bleecker Street. You were looking in the window of a bookshop. You turned your head and he stopped, and you thought you were seeing her, initially, for a moment. But stop, quiet. Absolute. The bar. You were there because of me. Yes, you were there because I look like a dead woman, initially. But everything after was built on something you didn't tell me. She turned to look at him. He was standing very still. The fracture in his composure had spread. His face was open in a way she had never seen it. Raw in a way she hadn't thought was possible for something that had been alive that long. You told me my conditions. I told you mine. I said, if I ask a question, you answer it. If there's something I need to know, you tell me before I figure it out. I know, you broke everyone. I know. She picked up her bag from the chair where she'd left it. He didn't move, didn't reach out, didn't try to stop her, a man who understood, in some deep, instinctive way, that the moment you most want to act is often exactly the moment you must be still. She walked past him. She made it to the front hallway. Phineas was there. His face, for the first time since she'd met him, was entirely unreadable, not delighted, not amused, not performing his professional serenity. Just a man who had watched his king lose things before and recognized what losing looked like. Miss Voss, he said. She stopped, and something in how he was standing made her wait. There is something, he said carefully, that I should have told him to tell you. And didn't, he held her gaze. The painting was burned. By Callum himself. In 1798, he burned it because he felt that preserving it was a way of refusing to let her go. Iris was very still. The painting in that room, Phineas continued, is a reproduction. Commissioned in 1921, because after nearly 100 years he could no longer precisely remember the color of her eyes. He wanted to get it right. A pause. He does not know the painting is still there. I kept it. I didn't tell him. Because I believed, and I still believe, though I was wrong about the method, that he needed to see the difference for himself between her and you. When the right person arrived, Iris looked at him for a long time. You gambled with that, she said. Yes, Phineas said. And I was wrong about the method. He didn't look away. I was not wrong about what I saw, she left. The October night was cold in the way that gets into your coat and stays there. She walked for a long time. 8 days. Iris went to work. She sorted correspondence from 1847. She catalogued a collection of daguerreotypes donated by an estate in Connecticut. She ate lunch at her desk. She made coffee she sometimes forgot to drink. She did not think about Callum Ashford, except constantly, the way you don't think about a bruise, except every time you move. The first note arrived on the second morning, heavy cream paper, the handwriting she recognized before she even unfolded it. Old-fashioned, deliberate. The letters of a man who had learned to write in a century that considered penmanship a form of character. You told me about the cuneiform tablet on the morning we had coffee. You said it was a receipt for livestock. You said it made you love history because it proved that people 4,000 years ago were just as boring and ordinary as we are. You said boring and ordinary, like it was the highest compliment you could pay anyone. I have been thinking about that for 3 weeks. Margot would not have said that. She would have said something about beauty. About the eternal, about the hand of God in the arrangement of things. You said boring and ordinary, and it was the most original thought I had encountered in 4 centuries. See, she put it in her desk drawer. She went back to work. The second note came the next morning. Phineas delivered them in person. She saw him leaving as she arrived. He didn't stop. He inclined his head as he passed, with the expression of a man who is doing what he believes is right and knows better than to push for credit. You arrange your groceries in a specific order when you put them away. Cold items first, always. You put the milk in the refrigerator before you take off your coat. You do this because when you were 7 years old, your mother left a gallon of milk on the counter overnight, and you have never entirely forgiven her for the waste. You told me this while I was carrying your bags up the stairs. You told me without noticing you were telling me. Margaret had servants. She never carried groceries. She never had a system. She was not a person who had systems. You are a person who has systems. The third note was 2 days later. You failed out of art school. You told me this as though it were a confession. You said you couldn't make beautiful things, so you learned to take care of beautiful things other people had made. You said it like that was a consolation prize. It isn't. You are the person who ensures that a 4,000-year-old receipt for livestock survives long enough for someone to hold it. That is not a consolation prize. That is the entire point. Margot made beautiful things. She painted. She was extraordinary at it. You preserve what others leave behind. Those are not the same work. They are not even the same calling. I knew the difference by the second week. I should have told you then. I didn't, because I was afraid you would leave. I was right to be afraid. See, she read that one 3 times, then put it in the drawer with the others. On the 6th morning, a shorter note. You were correct about the eggplant. It is technically a berry. I confirmed this. The confirmation required consulting 3 separate sources because I found the initial result implausible. You were also correct that I have meetings. I had one yesterday with the council. It concerned infrastructure issues in the Northern Court that have been pending for 60 years. Phineas noticed. He wrote the word focus on a piece of paper and held it up behind Lord Vane's head. Lord Vane did not notice. I am telling you this because you asked for the truth. And the truth is that I am managing a 700-year-old political institution, and I cannot concentrate properly because a woman with vegetable magnets on her refrigerator told me I was essentially a mayor. She was not entirely wrong. See, she laughed. Alone at her desk in the archive, in the particular silence that comes from being surrounded by things that have outlasted everything that once seemed urgent, she laughed. And then she pressed her hand over her mouth because the laugh had something else in it. Something that wasn't ready to be felt in public yet. The 7th note came with something taped to it, a small square of yellowed paper. Thin with age, handwriting in Latin dense and careful, in an archival sleeve, acid-free, the correct weight. The right kind for a document of this age. This is a bill of sale dated 1343, for 3 goats. I was present when it was written. The goats were, by any measure, terrible. I am giving it to you because it belongs in an archive with someone who understands what it means. Not what it literally says, what it means. Which is that someone in 1343 thought 3 goats were worth writing down, and 700 years later, a woman in a library will hold that piece of paper, feel connected to a stranger she will never meet. That's what you do. That's what you are. Margot painted portraits of people she thought were beautiful. You preserve receipts for goats. I know which one matters more. Phineas insisted on the archival sleeve. His exact words were, "She will lose all remaining respect for you if you deliver a 700-year-old document without acid-free protection." He was correct. He usually is. I find this exhausting. Cyrus held the receipt with both hands, the careful, instinctive grip of an archivist, the specific hold that means, I understand what this is. I understand what it has cost to survive this long. She sat with it for a long time. She thought about a man who had kept a receipt for goats in a box for 700 years. Not because it was valuable, not because it was historically significant, because it was the kind of thing he had known when he first held it that someone would care about someday. She thought about the box he'd said he hadn't opened in 4 centuries. She thought about what it costs to carry things that long without anyone to hand them to. She put the note and the receipt in the drawer with the others. On the morning of the 8th day, she arrived to find Phineas at the front desk, not delivering a note, just standing there. In his vest, in his composure, which was present but carrying something it wasn't entirely designed to hold, Miss Voss, he said. Phineas, there is a matter. He paused. The kind of pause that means, what I am about to say is not a small thing, and I am choosing my words carefully because the words matter. pertaining to the court, which I should not be telling you, and which I am telling you anyway, because I have been in this position before, and I know what it looks like when someone needs information in order to make a real decision. She waited. Lord Aldrich Vane has called an emergency council session. The third in 8 days. Phineas kept his eyes on hers. Steady, not performing calm, actually calm in the way of someone who has learned that panic is a luxury and composure is a tool. His stated concern is Callum's absence from court duties. His actual concern is more specific. What is his actual concern? You, Phineas said simply. Not personally, politically. A king who is distracted is a king who can be managed. Lord Vane has been waiting for an opportunity to expand his influence in the council for approximately a century. He has identified this situation as that opportunity. What happens if Vane gets what he wants? The council gains increased authority over the king's decisions. The checks on that authority are limited. Another pause. Callum is aware of the council sessions. He is not fully aware of the degree to which Vane has been working the court's position while he has been writing letters about goats. Yes, the smallest. Acknowledgement. While he has been writing letters about goats, she looked at Phineas. He looked at her. There is a note, he said. An 8th note. He asked me to deliver it today. He produced it. She opened it. One line. I am at the cafe. I have ordered a coffee I will not drink. I will wait. She folded it. Put it in her coat pocket. How bad is it? She said. The Vane situation, it is manageable, Phineas said, if Callum addresses it directly, which requires him to be present at court, which requires, he stopped, a careful stop. There are things that are more important than council politics, Miss Voss. I have believed this for a long time. I believe it more now than I did 8 days ago. She looked at him. She thought about what he'd told her on the night she left. About the painting. About what he'd done and what he'd believed. And the distance between those two things. You should have told him about the painting, she said. Yes, you should have let him make that decision. Yes, no qualification. No defense. I was trying to protect something I had no right to protect. He met her eyes. I am trying not to make the same mistake twice. She nodded. She left the library. The cafe was 3 blocks away. She stood outside for a moment. Looking through the window, he was at the corner table. The same table. The QR code menu card was on the table, and it was face down, which meant he had picked it up and turned it over and set it down again, and she would have paid considerable money to have seen his expression while doing that. The coffee in front of him was steaming. He wasn't touching it. He wasn't looking at the door. He was looking at the table, at his own hands. The way a person looks when they're not performing patience but actually practicing it. Sitting with the real weight of the possibility that the thing they're waiting for might not arrive. She pushed open the door. He heard it. His head came up. He looked at her, and his face did something complicated, something layered. Hope and restraint, and a kind of careful not reaching that she understood now, was what 700 years of loss had taught him to do when the thing he wanted was close enough to touch. Don't move first. Don't assume. Don't reach. Let it come. Or let it not. She walked across the cafe and sat down across from him. The coffee steamed between them. The QR code lay face down. I read your notes, she said. I know. The one about the groceries was unsettling. I know. The one about the eggplant was funny, a flicker in his eyes. Small. I wasn't trying to be funny, I know. That's why it was. She looked at him across the small table. The same table where he had held a QR code at arm's length and examined it like enemy intelligence. The same table where he had ordered a croissant he was never going to eat and held a coffee for its warmth and asked her what the oldest thing she had ever held was and listened to her answer like it was the most interesting thing he had encountered in 4 centuries. Maybe it was. I need to say something, she said. I'm listening. If you ever look at me and see her, even once, I'm gone. She kept her eyes on his. No second chances. No more notes. Done. I understand. I mean it. I know you mean it. His voice was quiet. You have never, in all the time I have known you, said a single thing you didn't mean. I'm not her, she said. No, I'm not a second version of her, no. And then quietly, with the weight of something that had been true for a while and was only now finding its shape in words. You are the original of something. I just didn't know what it was. Until I met you, the cafe was quiet around them. Morning light came through the window. He was in the shade of the awning. He had chosen this table on purpose. She understood that now. He would always choose the table that let him stay in the light beside her for as long as possible without paying the cost of it. Small adjustments. Made without announcement, order me a latte, she said. He raised his hand. The waitress came. He ordered her latte, his own coffee, which he would not drink. He spoke to the waitress with the grave courtesy he gave everyone, as though the transaction itself deserved full attention. "You're going to hold yours for the warmth again," Iris said. "It's a pleasant sensation. You could hold my hand instead." She put her hand on the table. "It's warmer." He looked at her hand, then at her face, and the centuries fell away. The court training and the managed composure and the careful architecture of a king who had learned to want nothing because wanting things eventually cost everything. She watched it leave his face. All of it at once, and what was left was a man, in a cafe, looking at a woman who had just put her hand on a table and offered it to him. The expression on his face was the most unguarded thing she had ever seen. He reached across the table, his fingers cold, still, 15 degrees, a wine cellar, a January window, folded around hers. She felt the chill settle against her skin. She held on, and neither of them moved. What Iris did not know, sitting in that cafe with his cold hand around hers and the QR code face down between them, was what Phineas was doing at that exact moment. Phineas was at a desk in the townhouse. In the administrative room Callum rarely entered, with papers arranged in front of him in the way of a man who had been very busy and very still simultaneously. He was reading a letter from Lord Aldrich Vane, the third this week. This one was not a request, not a diplomatic inquiry. It was phrased with the precision of a man who had decided that patience had reached its designed limit. The letter referenced the Act of Court Preservation, established 1403, rarely invoked. Never invoked in Phineas's memory, which was long and reliable. The Act stated, in precise and ancient terms, that any intimate association between a reigning king and a human being constituted a potential security vulnerability. That the court had the legal right to require resolution of that vulnerability. Resolution meant one of two things: separation or formal integration. Phineas read the letter twice. He set it down. He looked out the window at a street that was going about its Tuesday morning with no awareness of what was being decided in the room above it. He thought about Iris Voss, who catalogued daguerreotypes, who had a system for putting away groceries, who had held a 700-year-old receipt for goats with both hands, the way you hold something that deserves to be held correctly. He picked up the telephone. He called Callum's phone, which would go unanswered because Callum was in a cafe holding someone's hand. He left a message, 3 words, "Vane is moving." Then he put the phone down, folded his hands on the desk, sat very straight, in the way of a man who has served long enough to understand that service sometimes means holding the weight yourself while someone else has the time they need. Outside, the city moved, and in a cafe 3 blocks away, a woman held a cold hand and didn't let go, and Phineas sat with a letter from Lord Aldrich Vane and thought, some things are worth the complication. He was right. He was almost always right. It was, as Callum had once observed, extremely exhausting. The message from Phineas arrived at 11:47 in the morning. 3 words. Callum read it at the table, with Iris's hand still in his, with the coffee still cold, with the QR code still face down. He read it twice. His expression didn't change. That was the thing about 7 centuries. You learn to receive bad news without showing it. You learn to hold your face very still while the rest of you figured out what the still face was hiding. But Iris was watching. She had been watching him for weeks. She had catalogued his expressions the way she catalogued documents. She saw the slight tension at the jaw, the shift in his stillness from comfortable to controlled. Something happened, she said. Not a question. A matter at court. He set the phone down. It requires attention, Phineas? Yes. Is it the Vane situation? He went still, the recalibrating kind. How do you know about Vane? Phineas told me, this morning. Before I came here. Callum looked at her. Then at the phone, then back at her. Phineas told you. He said he was trying not to make the same mistake twice. A long moment. That is either very wise or very alarming, Callum said. He seemed to think it was both. He looked at their joined hands, her warmth against his cold. I need to go to the court, he said. I know, this isn't. He stopped. Started again. I want you to understand that this has nothing to do with. Callum? She squeezed his hand once. I know. Go. He looked at her, and the thing that crossed his face, that fast, unguarded thing, was not gratitude exactly. Something older than gratitude. The expression of a man who has spent centuries believing that the people who matter will eventually leave, and keeps being surprised when they don't. He stood. I'll come to you tonight, he said. Come to me tonight. He left. And Iris sat alone at the table with 2 cold coffees and a face-down QR code, and the clear-eyed understanding that the thing she had just stepped back into was considerably more complicated than she had fully understood. Good, she thought. She had never liked simple things. That evening, Callum stood at her window, looking at the street below. The way he always stood when he was working through something. Like he needed the moving world to think against. Vane invoked the act, he said. The act of court preservation. 1403. It hasn't been invoked in my memory. What does it mean? Practically, it means the council has legal standing to require. He paused, choosing between accurate and diplomatic, settling on accurate. Resolution. Of what they're calling a security vulnerability, which is me, which is the association. He turned. Not you specifically. The existence of an Callum? Yes, I'm the vulnerability, a breath, in their framing. Yes, what are the options? Separation, he said, or formal integration into the court. Formal integration meaning membership, permanent membership, which has implications. He said implications with the weight of a man who had been thinking about those implications for hours and was not certain how to present them to the person most directly affected. Tell me the implications, she said. Iris, all of them. That was our agreement. He looked at her. Formal court membership for a human being, in the historical application of this act, has never been achieved. A pause. Because humans age. Because the court's timeline is not compatible with a human life. So formal integration means... It means what you're thinking it means. The room was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The city moved outside. The Alexa spot on the counter was still empty. She hadn't plugged it back in. How long, she said, until the council session? 48 hours, and if you don't comply? Vane has grounds for a leadership review, which he won't win, but which will consume the next decade in proceedings and shift significant power away from the center of the court. He looked at the old ring on his left hand. Dark metal. No stone. It's a sophisticated move. He's been patient. He's been waiting for you to care about something, Iris said. Callum looked up. He couldn't threaten you when you had nothing to lose, she said. So he waited until you did. Silence? Yes, Callum said. That's actually very smart, it is. I find it deeply irritating, she almost smiled. I need to think, she said. Of course, alone, he nodded. The old-fashioned nod. He picked up his coat and moved toward the door and stopped. Iris, he didn't turn around. Whatever you decide, the decision is yours. It will always be yours. There is no pressure. There is no... I know, she said. Go home. Let me think. He left. And she sat alone in her apartment for a very long time. She thought about a lot of things. She thought about her mother leaving the milk on the counter. The specific fury of that. The waste of it. The way some small things become permanent positions. She thought about the cert school rejection letter, which she had kept, for reasons she had never examined, in the bottom of a box she hadn't opened in 11 years. She thought about the cuneiform tablet, 4,000 years old. A receipt for livestock, the weight of it in her hands. The understanding that hit her every time she held something that old. That the most ordinary things are the ones worth preserving. Not the grand events, the daily transactions. The evidence that someone was here. She thought about receipts. She thought about what it means to be the person who makes sure things survive. She thought about Callum Ashford, 707 years old. Still didn't know he was funny. Had held a QR code at arm's length, like evidence of a surveillance operation. Had built sculptures out of burrata and called it visual appreciation. Had spoken to Alexa with the diplomatic gravity of someone addressing a foreign head of state. Who had written 8 letters. Who had put a 1343 goat receipt in an archival sleeve, because Phineas had told him she would lose all remaining respect otherwise. Who had said, "You are the original of something." She thought about what that meant. Not as a romantic statement, as a factual one. The way he had said it. With the specificity of a man who has seen enough originals to know the difference between them and everything else. She thought about the 4 days, the ones he had mentioned, once, carefully, when describing the process, what it required. What the other side was, she checked honestly, whether she was afraid. She looked for the gaps, the inconsistencies, the places where the evidence didn't support the conclusion she was reaching. She wasn't afraid. She was something else. She was the way you feel standing in front of a document that has survived things that should have destroyed it. The way you feel holding something that was never supposed to make it this far but did. The specific combination of reverence and recognition that means, this matters, this is real, this is worth the handling. She got up, put on her coat, and went to find Phineas. He was in the townhouse. Of course he was. At his desk. In the administrative room Callum rarely entered, papers arranged in front of him in the way of a man who had been busy and still at the same time. He looked up when she came in. He didn't look surprised, Miss Voss, he said. I have questions, she said. I expected you would. The process, she said. 4 days, he said. What actually happens? Phineas looked at her for a long moment, assessing not whether she could handle it. She could tell that wasn't the question, but whether she was asking because she was preparing to say no or because she was preparing to say yes. He reached a conclusion. He told her all of it. Precisely. Without softening it and without dramatizing it. The way someone describes a procedure they've witnessed many times. The physical reality of it. The 4 days. What they would feel like. What the other side was. She listened without interrupting. And Callum, she said. During he would stay with you, Phineas said. He has done this before. For others in the court. He knows how to do it. Does he know I'm here? No, don't tell him yet. Phineas inclined his head. One more thing, he said. He opened a desk drawer, produced a sheaf of papers, dense with text. The court has a legal framework for this. Documented consent, rights. Obligations, he paused. It's comprehensive. She looked at the papers. You drafted these, she said. Over the last several weeks, yes. You were optimistic. I was prepared, he said. There is a difference. She took the papers. She read them, all of them. Standing in Phineas's office, turning pages with the careful precision of a woman who had spent 15 years handling documents that mattered. She read the clauses and the provisions and the legal language of a community that had been managing its own existence for longer than most nations. It was remarkably well written. She said so. Thank you, Phineas said. With what she had come to understand was his version of deep pride, she signed where indicated, 3 places Phineas witnessed, precisely. Without comment, now, she said. Tell me where he is. He was in the room with the clock, the one that had stopped in the 18th century. The one he had never restarted because restarting it would have been a kind of admission he wasn't ready. 4. He was standing in front of it. Not looking at it, looking past it. The way you look at something when what you're actually looking at is time itself. The abstract weight of how much of it you have moved through. He heard her come in. He turned and saw something in her face that made him go completely still. Iris. I signed the papers, she said, silence complete. The silence of a moment that has been moving toward itself for a long time and has finally arrived where it was always going. You. He stopped. Phineas had them ready. A pause. Of course he did, Iris. His voice was stripped. No register. No management. You don't have to. This isn't what I wanted. I never asked. I know you didn't ask. She took a step toward him. That's part of why. The council, the act, the pressure. None of that should. It doesn't. Another step. I've been thinking about this for 3 hours. Not about Vane. Not about the council. About the 4,000-year-old receipt for livestock. About what it means to be the person who makes sure things survive. He looked at her. I want enough time, she said simply, to actually understand what I'm looking at. You've been alive for 700 years. I've had 32. That's not enough. I want more. She held his gaze. And I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because I want to. Because this is the most interesting thing that has ever happened to me, and I am not ready for it to have an end date. He stared at her, not with the composed assessment she'd grown used to, with something that looked almost like bewilderment. A man who had gotten very good at bracing for loss and didn't know what to do with himself when the loss didn't come. You should be afraid, he said. You keep saying that. It's true. I'm an archivist, she said. I've spent my whole career with things that almost didn't make it. You learn to recognize what's worth the risk. She stopped in front of him. Close. You're worth the risk. The muscle at his jaw worked. Once, the 4 days, he said. I know, it won't be easy. I know. I'll stay with you, he said. Quiet, absolute, the entire time. I won't leave. I know that too. He looked at her for a long time. In the room with the stopped clock. With the light coming from somewhere gold and very old, then, very carefully, he reached out and took her face in both his hands. His palms were cool against her cheeks. 15 degrees. A wine cellar. A January window. Everything she had come to associate with safety and presence, and the specific cold that meant he was nearby. You are the most practical person, he said quietly, I have ever met. That's the nicest thing you've said to me. It was meant as an observation, I know. That's why it was nice. He looked at her for one more moment, then he pulled her in and held her, and she stood in his arms in the room with the stopped clock and thought, some things are worth preserving. Some things you hold with both hands because you understand their weight. Because you have spent your whole life learning to recognize what is real. This was real, whatever it cost. The 4 days were the worst thing she had ever experienced, and she had survived a broken engagement, graduate school, the year her father was sick, the art school rejection letter in the box she hadn't opened in 11 years. None of it was like this. She would not describe the details later. Not because she couldn't, because they belonged to her. The 4 days were hers. The cost of them was hers. The specific texture of what it felt like to be unmade and remade differently, that was not a story for anyone else. What she would say later was this: he stayed the entire time. He sat beside her and he did not leave. Not once, not for an hour. He was there when she closed her eyes and there when she opened them. He read to her, out loud, old documents, tax records from 1389, shipping manifests from 1412, a letter from 1501 about a dispute over goats. Not the same goats, different goats. History's recurring preoccupation with goats, the most boring things he owned, which was, she understood, the most loving thing he knew how to do. And Phineas sat outside the door for all 4 days. On the other side, the world was different. Not visually. The room looked the same. The stopped clock, the books, the November light through the window. But the light was extraordinary. She could see the individual motes of dust moving through it. She could hear the building settling 2 floors down. She could feel the exact temperature of the air against her skin, with a precision she had never known was possible. Like someone had turned up the resolution on everything. Like she had been living in one version of the world and had just been handed another. She sat up. Colum was watching her. He had been watching her for 4 days. He looked, for the first time since she'd known him, tired. Not physically tired, the other kind. The kind that comes from caring deeply about the outcome of something you couldn't control. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. And she could hear his voice differently now. The specific frequencies of it. Like hearing an instrument you've listened to your whole life and suddenly understanding how it's constructed. "It worked," she said. "Yes, I can hear the building. You'll learn to filter it. I can hear you not breathing. That will become familiar." She looked at her hands. Same ink stain on the right index finger from the pen she'd used to sign Phineas's documents. Same small scar on the left thumb from a box cutter in 2019. But cooler now. And still in a way they hadn't been before. "Your hands," she said. "Yes, they're like mine now, in some ways." She looked at him. He looked at her. "Phineas is going to imply he was right," she said. "Phineas would never say I told you so. He'll do it very precisely." For the next 400 years, something moved in Callum's eyes. The almost smile. The shadow of the real one. "Probably," he said. She stood, waited for the room to tip or the world to feel wrong. The room was steady. The world was fine, better the fine. "I want coffee," she said. "You won't need it. I don't care. I want the smell." He stood, extended a hand. She took it, same temperature. Both of them. For the first time, she noticed. He noticed her noticing. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. The council session happened 4 days later. Phineas had managed Vane with the specific efficiency of a man who had been managing difficult people for longer than most nations had existed. The session was formal, documented, conducted with the precise legal language of the Act and its provisions, and Phineas's quietly comprehensive paperwork. Colum stood before the council with Iris beside him. She had asked to come. He had not argued. The council was 12 vampires in a room with high ceilings and better lighting than she'd expected. Some looked roughly her apparent age. Some looked older. Lord Aldrich Vane sat at the far end of the table with the expression of a man who had prepared for several scenarios and was currently recalculating which one he was actually in. Colum addressed the council. He spoke with the register she'd observed once before when she'd caught him not performing for her benefit. The full authority of 700 years of leadership distilled into a tone that meant, "This is how things are going to be. And the reason I'm not asking is that this is not a question." He presented Iris not as a vulnerability, not as a complication, as a member of the court, formally integrated, documented, legally resolved under the very act Vane had invoked. Vane opened his mouth. Colum looked at him. Vane closed his mouth. It was, Iris thought, extremely impressive, and also slightly terrifying, and also, she couldn't help it, a little funny. Because this was the same man who had held a QR code at arm's length and examined it like enemy intelligence. She kept her face very neutral. Phineas, standing 3 feet to her left, also kept his face very neutral. Their eyes did not meet. If they had, neither of them would have been able to maintain it, the session concluded. Phineas had the paperwork ready before Vane finished his final objection, which told her something about Phineas's confidence and something about how long he had been planning. Afterward, in the hallway, Callum looked at her. "You're amused," he said. "I'm very impressed. That's the same face. It's a similar face," she admitted. "The QR code kept occurring to me." He looked at the ceiling. "I handled that session with full diplomatic authority," he said. "You did. You were very," she searched, "commanding, but I kept thinking about the croissant sculpture." A pause. The specific pause of a 700-year-old king deciding how to respond to his consort, comparing his diplomatic authority to a pastry arrangement. "The croissant," he said, "was architecturally sound." "It really was," she said. "That was the impressive part, and despite everything, despite the council and the act and Vane's very carefully managed exit, despite 4 days and the stopped clock and the cold hands that were now both cold, he almost smiled, the real one, small. The one closer to the man underneath the king. She decided then that she was going to spend a very long time working on that smile. She thought she had enough time for it. 3 months later, the cafe hadn't changed. Same corner table, same window, same QR code menu card that neither of them had ever scanned and neither of them ever would. It had become a fixed point, a monument to a very specific kind of principled objection that had somehow become a ritual. Iris sat across from Callum. She held her coffee with both hands. The warmth of the ceramic was vivid now. She could feel the exact gradient where the cup's heat met the air, where the air met her skin, which was, like everything, richer in information than it used to be. She held it the way he always held his, both hands, absorbing the warmth. Not drinking. He noticed, of course he noticed. "You're holding it the way I hold mine," he said. "I'm not much of a coffee drinker," she said. "I just like the smell." He looked at her. The recognition landed. She watched it happen. The echo of the thing he had said at this same table on their first morning. And something in his face did the complicated thing. The thing it did when he was feeling several things at once and didn't know which one to show. He settled on a smile. Small, real, the one she'd been working on. "That's my line," he said quietly. "It's mine now." Outside, the city moved. People walked past who didn't know, couldn't know, that the woman in the cafe had made a decision 3 months ago that had cost her everything she had been and given her something she hadn't known to want. That the man across from her had been alive when the building they were sitting in was Fields. That the QR code on the table had become something like a private joke between two people who now had enough time to have jokes that lasted centuries. Margaret at the library had noticed things. Margaret always noticed everything. There had been the filing cabinet incident. Iris had moved it. A full filing cabinet. One hand. Without thinking. Because she'd been thinking about filed correspondence from 1889 and not about what her left arm was doing. She had looked up. Margaret had been watching. "I work out," Iris said. Margaret had offered her a protein bar. Iris had accepted it because refusing would have been more suspicious. And then had stood in the break room for 10 minutes, looking at a protein bar she was never going to eat and thinking about the specific irony of her life. She told Callum this now. She watched him receive it. The slow closing of his eyes. The long pause. The opening. His eyes, when they opened, held something in the territory between laughter and love, which, she had found, were not as far apart as people thought. "Not in practice. That," he said, "is a terrible excuse. It worked on Margaret. It absolutely did not work on me. You didn't offer me a protein bar. I went very still and said I work out extensively, which is the same as laughing. It is not the same as. It really is." He looked at her across the table. And what happened in his face in that moment was something she was still learning the vocabulary for. Because it wasn't any single thing. It was all of them at once. The amusement and the recognition and the settled quality of a man who had stopped bracing for loss. Who had, somewhere in the last 3 months, started believing in the thing in front of him. "Phineas asked me to give you something," he said. He reached into his jacket, produced a small package, wrapped in plain paper, handed it across the table. She opened it. Inside was a photograph. Old. Not quite a daguerreotype, but close. Mounted on cardstock in the style of the 1860s. A group of people standing in front of a building she didn't recognize. And in the back left corner of the photograph, a man dark suit. Very still. Looking at the camera with the specific quality of composure she knew better than almost anything else Callum. Unmistakably, in 1863, Phineas found it, Callum said. In a collection donated last year to a university archive. He thought you'd want it properly housed. She turned it over. Nothing written on the back, he said. Callum paused. The thing in his voice that appeared when he was conveying something Phineas had said that he found both accurate and personally uncomfortable. He said, "She will understand what this is better than anyone. She should be the one to decide where it lives." Iris looked at the photograph, then at Callum. "He's giving me a photograph of you," she said. "He's giving an archive a historically significant primary source document," Callum said, "which happens to also be a photograph of me, to my archive, to a qualified professional archivist who understands provenance and proper preservation, who is also your consort." A pause. Phineas would argue those facts are unrelated. Phineas would not argue that with a straight face. "No," Callum agreed. "He really wouldn't." She looked at the photograph again. The man in the back corner, standing very still in 1863, now sitting across from her in a cafe in November, arguing about whether archival provenance and personal relationships were legally distinct categories. "It's a good photograph," she said. "My expression is, exactly like it always is. I've been told I have a consistent face, very consistent." Over multiple centuries, apparently, she set it carefully on the table, between the coffee cups. Beside the face-down QR code, "I'm going to catalog this properly. Full provenance documentation, of course. Known subject, unknown photographer. I genuinely don't remember who took it. Known subject. One Callum Ashford. Vampiric court official, 544 years old at time of photograph." She looked up. "Does that go in the official record?" Phineas would say yes. Phineas would say it in the most formal possible language. He would use the word supernatural in a legal context without irony. He's done it. "I've seen the paperwork." She set the photograph down gently. "The way you set down things that have survived a long time and deserve to keep surviving. Speaking of paperwork, the court register, Iris Voss. Consort to the king, formerly of Ohio, archivist." She held his gaze. "Formerly of Ohio." Phineas felt it was contextually relevant. It's in an official vampire court document. "Formerly of Ohio. Ohio is a specific and distinct origin point," Callum said. With complete seriousness, "Phineas believes in comprehensive records. I was born in Columbus. That is now also in the record. Formerly of Columbus, Ohio, archivist, consort to the king." She looked at him. Something settled in her chest, something that had been waiting to settle for a while. "In 400 years, some historian is going to find that document and have a great many questions, and the answers will all be in the archive," he said. "Because the consort is an archivist, who preserves receipts for goats, among other things." She looked at him. He looked at her. The cafe moved around them. The waitress refilled water 2 tables over. Someone near the window typed on a laptop with the intensity of a deadline. The city outside did what the city always did. Moved, continued. Proceeded without particular awareness of what was sitting at the corner table with 2 cold coffees and 1 face-down QR code and 1 1863 photograph and an archivist from Columbus, Ohio, who had signed 3 documents on a Thursday afternoon and would now have considerably more time than she had originally planned. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Ask me." The clock. In the townhouse, he went still. The comfortable kind, not the wary kind. "What about it? I think we should restart it," she said. He looked at her. "Not because the past doesn't matter," she said. "Not because you should forget him, but because—" She stopped. Found the right words. "Because that's what clocks are for. Not for stopping at the moment you lose something. For measuring what comes after." The room was quiet around them. "And there's a lot of what comes after now," she said. He looked at her for a long time, the man in the cafe, the fixed point in the turning world, the thing that doesn't move while everything else does. He reached across the table. His hand? 15 degrees, a wine cellar, a January window, and also exactly the same temperature as her hand now, covered hers. "Yes," he said. "Complete. When would you like to?" "Now," she said. "After coffee. We haven't drunk the coffee. We're not going to drink the coffee." "No," he agreed. "We never drink the coffee. We should probably stop ordering coffee." "It would feel wrong," he said. "It would feel very wrong," she agreed. They sat for another moment. The coffee cooled. The QR code lay face down. The 1863 photograph sat between them. The man in the back corner very still, completely composed, exactly the same as always. "One more thing," he said. "Yes, you said some weeks ago that I could hold your hand instead of the coffee. Because it was warmer." She looked at their hands, already together on the table. "It's not warmer now," she said. "No," he said. "It's not, is that?" She stopped. "I was going to say," he said quietly, "that I find I prefer it anyway." She looked at him. The real smile. The small one. The one she'd been working on. Same temperature, she said. Same temperature, he agreed. Same stillness. She turned her hand over, laced her fingers through his. Let's go restart the clock, she said, and they left the cafe together. The coffee sat on the table, cold and untouched and perfectly itself. The QR code lay face down. The 1863 photograph remained on the table for a moment after they left. The man in the corner, frozen at 544, in a city that no longer looked like that, in a life that had contained so much loss and so much time and had arrived, finally, by a very long road, at a woman from Columbus, Ohio, at a corner table. At two cold hands, the same temperature, at enough time, somewhere across the city, Phineas was at his desk. If anyone had asked how his morning was going, he would have said, uneventful, and he would have been lying. And he would have been smiling while he did it. He was updating the court register, line by line, the way you update things that matter, with full attention, with correct language, with the understanding that someone 4 centuries from now will need to read this and understand exactly what happened. He paused at one entry. Write it back to himself, Iris Voss. Consort to the king, formerly of Columbus, Ohio, archivist. He considered it for a moment, a dead one more line beneath it, in the small, precise script he used for annotations. She was the original of something. He just needed long enough to find out what. He capped his pen, put the register aside, looked out the window at the November morning, ordinary, cold. The city going about itself with complete indifference to what had just been recorded 2 floors above it, in approximately 40 minutes, if his calculations were correct. And they were, reliably, which he found both satisfying and occasionally tedious. He would hear the clock in the sitting room begin to tick again. For the first time since 1782, he had already decided how he would respond to this. He would not respond. He would simply note the time, record it, date it. Add the full relevant context in the proper column. Because Phineas believed in comprehensive records, because some things deserved to be written down, because that, in the end, was how anything survived.